We'll get started. Now, please be careful, everybody. There's a mounted bit here. Be careful walking on that. I'd actually rather you don't. There's one at the back too. I'd rather you don't walk across here because it's dangerous and everybody's tripped on this. So let's try not to come through this front area. I think it's safer. All right, so we're going to get started. And as everyone, yep. Okay. So in your packs, you'll see this flyer. So I don't have to repeat it. You haven't got it? Okay. All right. So you will receive in your satchel this flyer, which is your invitation to join our practitioner membership program. Now, the number one question that I get asked is, how do you know what SNPs are relevant? And it's the $50 million question, isn't it? So starting September 1, we have our training program starting, which will continue for the rest of the year. We will work through the variant reports to tell you what the SNPs that are relevant are, what the RSIDs are, whether they are up-regulations or down-regulations, and what genes they work with. Okay? So that's very relevant. It's what everybody wants to know. That's why we've decided to start at September 1. The second question I get asked, which is probably, what genetic testing do I like? And we've just got the introduction of the bioceuticals one, which I will be, see, you tripped over it. I said, don't go this way. Go up and through to your line. I'll be watching you. I don't want any injuries from this silly thing here. And in fact, we've got to... Yeah. So, we've got the introduction of the new bioceuticals, which I will be doing an assessment of. We'll also kick off with that in our first session come September 1. I am meeting with bioceuticals. We're going to go through it. I think if you're a beginner, it's probably a nice place to start because it's relatively simple. Does it give you the whole range of SNPs that I like to see with my complicated patients? Not yet, but I did have a meeting with them yesterday and I'm hoping that we can develop that and increase it to the relevant SNPs. I think Sterling's report that a lot of the methylation practitioners use is great, but it's 84 pages and a lot of the SNPs are not relevant. There's also Dr. Ben Lynch's Stratagene, which again is very basic, but we are working with him as a whole group of practitioners around the world to get him the evidence base to increase his SNPs on that, because he's a very, very basic at this point. So I guess the answer is it depends on where you are. If you're just starting out, then certainly the more basic the report, the easier it is for you. But if you are planning to do longer term methylation stuff, as I said to bioceuticals yesterday, I would like to see more SNPs in there. And I think the advantage of the bioceuticals is that we don't get into so much of the legalities and the potential insurance complications, because And this was another conversation we had yesterday. I believe that in the next 10 years, we're probably going to have insurance companies say, I want your genetic report. And so what does that then mean? If it means that from a... We need to shut that door. Can you shut the door? Thanks, Laura. I think from a genetic point of view, you know, being able to see the BRCA potentially causes problems because we have this insane thought process. You have BRCA, you're definitely getting breast cancer or ovarian cancer, which is a lot of rubbish. It's like APOE, or APOE4, you're definitely going to end up with Alzheimer's. That's not the case at all. And it's usually combinations of genes and obviously environmental factors that confer the higher susceptibility to disease. So we need education not only from patients and practitioners, but also governing bodies to say there is not this straight association. Trisomy 21, yes, but certainly not with the others. So we have this complication where a lot of patients will say to you, yes, but what about the legalities of it? So my answer to them is, one, you need to weigh up. At the moment, insurance companies, if they get hold of it and look at it, they can and they do refuse to give life insurance as a result. So I say to my patients, it depends on where your thinking is right now, and this may change over time. But are your health conditions such that being able to understand where your susceptibility lies is more important than you getting life insurance, or do you actually ever want life insurance? And a lot of them will say, I don't want life insurance, I don't care. But it's very different to asking a 5-year-old to do the genetic test and then trying to think what we might want of them in 40 years' time. My personal point of view is that in the next 10 years, we'll pretty well all have some sort of genetic report. And my worry is, will the health funds then turn around and say, well, you have X, therefore you're not getting health insurance cover? I guess that's and so I think we need to start now at forming committees and having conversations with health funds and governing bodies to say, you know, we know that there is a susceptibility, but we can also show you case histories of families that have had, you know, I had a guy who had 6 members of his family, male, brothers, sisters, uncles, cousins, who died of heart attacks before the age of 52. And he was 49 at the time. And so that's a huge susceptibility. So we looked at his homocysteine levels, which were through the roof. We looked at his cardiovascular risk, his cholesterol and everything else. And he did have a lot of susceptibility. But he's still alive today. And we didn't go down that same path. So just because someone has a susceptibility, it doesn't mean they're going to end up with a disease. So it is a bit of a minefield at the moment. I don't think there's any, 100% answer. But I think that's the advantage that we have of, say, the bioceuticals one at this point, is that really we're not seeing BRCA and some of these others that are saying, okay, well, here's the problem. But it's up to the individual. But as a practitioner of 10 years with methylation and SNPs, I like to see a lot of SNPs at this point. And so that's why we'll have that conversation with people like bioceuticals to see if we can get more of these relevant SNPs, and we know that that's in the process. So the whole thing about genetic testing is a whole nother topic that we have to be aware of, but I don't think we need to be afraid of it, because I think every single person on the planet, well, not every single, but certainly in the developed countries, I think most people are going to have some sort of genetic report in the next 10 to 15 years. It's going to be, and that's why I think, you know, the more GPs that we can get involved in this commentary, it's going to be good, because to stick your head in the sand and say MTHFR has no bearing, no information, no nothing, well, it doesn't matter, is stupid. It's ignorant. You'll have a what? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think part of the problem was that when patients first started to come in and ask, could they please have their MTHFR gene tested? And a lot of the GPs at the time said, yes, you can. But the problem was there was no training behind A, what the results meant, or B, what the potential implications might be. And then on the one hand, they had patients walking in and said, I have MTHFR, therefore I'm going to be sick and I'm going to end up with this, and therefore I need to do something about it. The problem was there was no education around the back end of it to be able to say, I can understand that you might want to get this test done. It doesn't mean necessarily that there is any problems, but perhaps we should look at evaluating your folate status and seeing if you've got any family history that might make us think that there is something we might need to address. That's all that had to be said. But unfortunately, the complaints from the GPs went back to the governing bodies and said, well, what are we testing this for when we don't know what it means? And so the response was, well, we're not going to test for it. So education is important from all areas, and you can't blame the GPs turning around and saying, I'm not going to do it, because they didn't know what it meant or what the relevance was, or if there was a relevance. So the easy answer was, well, I'm not going to test for it. So, do you want to make your comment now about that? Oh, there's a microphone at the middle. Do you want to just go and... It's all... Just leave... Oh, I was going to say, leave it there.
Hi, my name's Dr. Maria Mackey. I'm an integrated functional doctor, but I'll give you a quick lowdown. One, GPs aren't geared up to understand methylation and SNPs. It is a specialist area. Two, nothing pisses them off more than naturopaths sending forms to test AYZ. They've got to understand that if it's not clinically appropriate for Medicare to rebate it, they're going to have to pay for it. Just, you guys have got to know that, but you're probably not the group that I need to talk to.
But Medicare did rebate it at the time.
Yeah,
they did.
It is not clinically relevant. Medicare won't subsidise it.
Not now, but at the time.
I understand, Carolyn, but I'm just giving them now. I'm not going to go into the... Just because what happens is that I don't want angst for you guys when you're dealing with the doctors, but basically they don't know. Unless they've come and studied and are highly informed, you're going to know more than them. So and people pay for it now. So it's just one of those things. And if you mention the word MTHFR to most doctors, even integrative, and I must admit, there's a strong push from an MTHFR perspective. It's almost like politics. You know, SNPs are SNPs at the end of the day. I understand that they don't. And so it sets up all this, issues that they have about their intelligence. You're insulting it. It's just grief you don't need as practitioners. And I'm just trying to be user-friendly with my advice so that you can work with them as a group rather than, be autonomous. Don't be afraid. Make them pay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, and that's what I've been doing for, I can't tell you how many years. I don't bother. If I often do get GPs, specialists, doctors contact me and say, I'm referring this patient for you. I'd love to be kept up to date with the progress. And I'm so excited by that because I think it's really good. But on the whole,
sorry to interrupt. I've actually written a course workshops for GPs in Auckland where I introduce them to the idea and start to make it really simple for them. So I'm trying to bridge some gaps between it right now. It's been really successful. So if anybody's interested in learning more, I think we're making some big steps.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good. All right, so let's move on. Oh, I can't progress the slide. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So we talked about low, okay, so here's our low serotonin. So we talked about MAO and affecting dopamine. So here's low serotonin, so high MAO activity. So this is similar to your COMT minus minus. This is your serotonin high activity. Associated with social phobia, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, OCD, constipation, because serotonin is really required for that gut motility. And so you will see a lot of people who have very disturbed gut, and we talked about the LPS affecting and stealing tryptophan. It can really reduce our serotonin levels. Depression, particularly worse during winter. Anxiety, social anxiety, aggression, carbohydrate craving. So as a general rule of thumb, if someone is craving carbohydrates, they're probably trying to self-medicate to get their serotonin higher. Tyrosine, so that's why I think some patients don't feel particularly good when you put them on a keto diet. On the whole, I think most people do very well neurologically, but some don't. And they get terrible sleep, some people. This one of the side effects of a keto diet is that they have chronic insomnia. And I think that's a really good message that perhaps serotonin was disturbed in the first place and we've probably shifted that balance a bit too far. Low pain tolerance, poor dream recall, insomnia, impulsive tendencies and low self-esteem. Whereas high serotonin and low MAO, they can be quite aggressive, antisocial, confused, very agitated, muscle twitching, and GI distress. And so one of the hardest things, I guess one of the easiest things to say to someone as far as serotonin goes is, are you quite OCD in your behaviour? And you need to sort of ask along that line of questioning, because you want to find out just how bad it is. And I've got a lot of patients and they'd say, yeah, how did you know that? Oh, well, I've asked you enough questions to know that your serotonin's a bit low, but how bad is the OCD? Well, I actually don't tell anyone this, but it's really bad. I don't step on cracks. I have to redo and touch everything 15 times. I really have to be very methodical. And it's often the people who, if everything doesn't go their way as they plan it, they completely lose the plot. If their day doesn't go in the structured, ordered way that they think it should, and their plans are out of control, they're the ones that really freak out. Picking. People who pick, pull out their eyebrows, eyelashes, pick their fingernails. They're all signs of this serotonin imbalance. And that the low. And one of the best nutrients we can use to help OCD is N-acetylcysteine. And there's a lot of research around it being extremely helpful for anxiety, bipolar, OCD. And I use it in combination often with sarcosine for OCD. COMT. So we talked quite a lot about COMT. when we were before the break, and I think we've probably said as much as we need to about that. Interestingly, which we didn't mention, was that the COMT V158 plus more susceptible to pain. So I often think about people who have really just chronic pain. There's a lot of evidence to show that the V158 and the H2H COMT polymorphisms definitely make you more susceptible to pain. And so in just improving the working of that enzyme can help to reduce it. All right, so there we are again with our pathway planner for dopamine and also for serotonin. And as I said, you know, these you can get from, we'll send you the link for these on Monday. These are very helpful when you've got very complicated patients, because what you can literally do is circle. So let's say you know that someone has high ROS, right, reactive oxygen species. You can actually go and circle all the things on the pathway planner that you think could be affecting it. Then with your line of questioning, and I often do that with nutrients. So thiamine, for me, is probably one of the most important B vitamins because it's affected by gut. It's affected by so many different paths of the pathway, but it's also one of the most important cofactors we have here, B1. And so you can see that, for example, with the thiamine, you need it for your electron transport chain. You need it for so many important metabolism of fats and carbohydrates particularly. You know, when you see pyruvate and lactate out of control, then you know that you've got probably part of the problem is thiamine. And when you don't eat meat, you're going to be also reducing your thiamine. When you have a ketogenic diet, you're going to be more susceptible to thiamine. And at the worst, you know, you can get ataxia, peripheral neuropathy, all sorts of things. So what I spend a lot of time with is going through the individual nutrients, and I look at everything that they do, and I then say, okay, what on the pathway might have depleted it? What in their environment or what they're eating, or, I mean, because people don't just have moderate diets anymore, do they? They're either ketogenic or no carbs, lots of carbs, no protein, histamine, oxalates, FODMAPs. I mean, everyone is going on wild diets. So we have to assume that most of our patients have some sort of nutrient deficiencies if they're being skewed down particular diets. And that's why we don't want to do any of these long term, but we certainly need to do it in the short term when we're trying to affect some sort of change. Low dopamine, so as I said, addictive tendencies, restless legs, low libido, lack of motivation, depression definitely is a high part of that. Mental exhaustion, dull, boring dreams. And I would say very bad patients at the top of that list. High dopamine, these are the aggressive. It can be definitely linked with schizophrenia. They're impulsive, they're reckless. Well, they don't need to be, but some of them are. And you can also get a bit of OCD when it comes to dopamine. So as far as testing, so my first appointment is the history. And everyone will come to you and they will have their presenting symptoms. Now, my presenting, so in our practitioner learning series last week, we went through my intake form and asked all the questions that I would want to know at that first appointment. But what I'm really trying to do, and I might just spend an hour and a half just looking at their initial symptoms and say, okay, tell me about the headaches. Okay, well, I get them premenstrually. Do you also get them at ovulation? Yep. Does anything make it worse? Yep. Chocolate sets it off too. I know that. What about when you eat chili? Yep, it does. Do you get very anxious? Do you have pain premenstrually? Yep, I do. In fact, the pain's so bad, I've got to take 2 days off work. When did it start? Well, it happened pretty much as soon as puberty kicked in. As soon as my period started, it started. And now recently it's getting worse and I'm getting migraines and I'm having to take more time off work. Does anyone in your family have a family history of problems with estrogen? Well, yep, my mum has fibroids. My grandmother had endometriosis. So probably. Okay. Have you got heavy periods? Yep, I do. So I've just explained someone who has a problem with histamine being driven by estrogen issues, both at ovulation and premenstrually. All because her very first question said, migraines, tell me about it, or headaches. So straight away I know that methylation is probably a big part of the problem because she hasn't got enough methyls to kick in that histamine N-methyl transferase. I also know that she has a family history of estrogen dominance, and so estrogen dominance will cause this surge in histamine because estrogen will increase histamine. Right? Estrogen will increase histamine levels, and that's why you get period pain. That's why you get migraines. So the first thing you will do is obviously put them on a low histamine diet, assess for gut, because we have microbes in our gut that increase histamine. And if they've been on certain medications, then the second enzyme that decreases histamine, which is the DAO enzyme in the gut, may be inhibited. Proton pump inhibitors. Antihistamine. I know it sounds crazy, but how many people take an antihistamine every day of their lives to help with their allergies? But an antihistamine decreases the DAO enzyme in the gut. So their ability to cope with food-based histamine is reduced considerably. So you want to take them initially off high histamine foods, improve estrogen metabolism, and improve gut function, and assess if there's any high histamine producing bacteria like Morganelli and Klebsiella and Citrobacter will increase histamine levels. Gut disturbance, as we all know, is one of the most critical things because it is shifting things everywhere. So the second thing she says is, well, I urinate a lot too. What do you mean by that? Well, I just seem to want to go to the toilet all the time. And are you thirsty? Because I'm thinking diabetes. No, not particularly. Okay. So anywhere you have smooth muscle in the body, mouth, skin, esophagus, gut, bladder, bowel, uterus, histamine will cause contraction. It'll cause aggravation, stimulation. So I could make an assumption that her urination is because the bladder is being stimulated and affected by the level of histamine. The other thing that causes urination or at least irritation of the bladder are oxalates. And oxalates are unfortunately now endemic in our food source because glyphosate is used on pretty well all GMO crops. And Monsanto's original argument was, well, it doesn't, the shikimate pathway that we're affecting in the plant actually doesn't exist in humans, so it's non-toxic to humans. But what Dr. Stephanie Seneff has shown in her countless papers is that in actual fact it is reducing all the vitamins that we need from the food we eat. So not only are we affecting zinc, because oxalates will bind to zinc, they'll bind to B6 and they'll bind to iron. So the oxalate type patient is that diffuse gut pain that you can't get rid of. You'll say, what's your gut pain like? You getting cramping? Not particularly, no. Are you getting diarrhea? Not really. Constipation? Sometimes. Where's the pain? It's sort of all over. Okay, and what does it feel like? Just pain. They can't describe what it is, but it's pain, and they will often get a pain here. So your assessment needs to be for oxalates, well, what exactly are you eating? And one of the things I look for is eGFR levels, because it's an indication that the kidneys may be struggling with A, ammonia, or B, the oxalates. And I had a patient of mine who was doing really well. And all of a sudden I got her update in her bloods, and I see that her eGFR has gone from 90 to 67. And I think, wow, what's happened? So when I was speaking to her, I said, you know, what are you doing that's different? Your eGFR has really dropped quite considerably, and I can't see that you've ever had a problem with that before. You getting any headaches or anything? Nope. I said, well, what are you eating? And she said, well, I'm not really having any brekkie because I'm going off to work. But what I've decided to do is I'm going to get healthy. And I've made myself a juice. 2 litres I make every morning. Isn't that good? I'm having it all day. And I said, I bet you've got in that juice carrot, celery, beetroot and ginger. How do you know that? And she said, I've also got some spinach. Okie doke. Well, I think I just know the reason. So she has overloaded the body's capacity to clear those oxalates, and the oxalates go to the kidneys and impair function of the kidneys. That's why we get stones. So many of our patients, I think, with pyrols have that exact problem. B6 and zinc is being bound for some reason. It's probably the oxalates, because often, and iron. So here's a good example. I've got many patients of mine who have wacky iron, and they have to take it all the time, or the iron just falls out of the system. Forget fertility, not fertility, but I'm talking just normal iron levels. And you think, wow, eGFR isn't that great. They've got signs and symptoms of oxalate issues. So signs and symptoms of oxalate issues, we've got a webinar on that if you want to know more. But essentially it's recurrent candida, it's bladder irritation, it's, well, Susan Costin Owens has linked it with autism. And I think a lot of kids with autism do have oxalate issues. And there is some research to show that the kids that are doing repetitive behaviours like throwing themselves, or rubbing themselves against tables and things with their gut, it's trying to fix that pain that they're getting. So oxalates, I forgot where I was at. Oxalates, big issue. I was telling you about this patient. So she was juicing 2 litres of high oxalate foods and her body couldn't cope with it. Carrot, celery, beetroot. 3 of the highest oxalate foods, and spinach, and soy, and sesame, and potatoes. So I said to her, all right, let's cut it out. I want you to cut out the juice, get rid of the juice, and we'll just avoid all those very high oxalate foods. I gave you some calcium and magnesium, because if you give calcium citrate and magnesium citrate at the time they eat, it stops the oxalates going to the kidney, and it will bind with the food oxalates, because everything's got a bit of oxalates. And within 4 months of doing nothing else, her EGFR had come back to normal. So your initial appointment gives you so many clues. The tests that I do are probably the number one is the organic acids, because it gives you the here and the now. Your genetics give you your susceptibility, but you really do want to know what's going on with the biochemistry now. So I like the organic acids because it can give you not only very sensitive markers for yeast and Clostridia, but it does give you glutathione status, B vitamin status, VMA, your neurotransmitters, and it gives you a really good place to start. Because if you can see that oxalates, for example, oxalic acid, is through the roof, well, you know that that's your first point of call. You put your B12 and your cofactors in, and you address the oxalates. That's your first point. You know straight away that you have to do that first, because that's going to affect iron, zinc, and B6, potentially affect the bladder, potentially affect the thyroid, potentially affect arthritis. I think most people with just osteoarthritis, I think they've probably got oxalate problems, because the pain will go. I had an incident where I made this dish that had a lot of high oxalate foods, and I got really excited, and everyone in the family loved it, so I went a bit overboard. And I literally woke up one morning and I could barely hold a pen in my hand. And I thought, you know what, that's ridiculous. I've just completely overwhelmed my oxalate pathway. I've always had gut issues, and this is why I got into this in the first place. So my gut has always been my Achilles heel. And so it doesn't take much to sort of flick it off the straight and narrow. So it's just good to remember that people come in and out of these things, but we need to be able to look at it. And the organic acids is a very, very good test. Methylation panels I tend to do mostly in fertility. However, we have a new test that is now available in Australia, which we're going to be talking about tomorrow, about adenosine. And you can now see adenosine. Remember, adenosine was what we were looking at in the methionine pathway that is created in response to SAM converting to homocysteine. And if that's elevated, along with SOR, you're inhibiting methylation. So that's now quite valuable for us to be able to see. So I might actually start doing more of the methylation panels. Bloods, definitely, because I think they can give us, if you really understand the finite reference ranges that we're going for, then you can start to address something before it's too much of an issue. And thyroid function is classic for that. You know, the reference ranges, once you get a TSH over 5, you've pretty well got thyroid disease. But if you can really tackle it when it's over 2, and you can see that there's problems, and you can check for iodine and selenium, and you can improve it, then you can actually make significant changes. Stool tests, yes, because gut is key. And then the genetic tests that we might consider. But if money is the issue, then I would definitely start with the organic acids, because it gives you the here and now of the biochemistry. Here's our organic acids, and you can see you've got your yeast markers, your fungal markers, your yeast, the Clostridia markers, or bacterial and Clostridia markers here. Then we can see oxalic acid at the top, and often you will see it off the charts Particularly in autistic kids, you will see it, way, way high. Lactate to pyruvate is important for our carbohydrate metabolism. B1, 2, 3, 5, 6, very important, and ALA in there. Mitochondrial markers, and we're going to look through some of these in the case studies. Neurotransmitters, our HVA, VMA here. And then uracil to thiamine. So you often will see a high uracil, low thiamine, which is often a status of MTH or folate deficiency. Fatty acids, and then here you can see your MMA, B6, B5, riboflavin, vitamin C, CoQ10, N-acetylcysteine, which you often see just not even registering, same with vitamin C, and biotin. And we often see this biotin deficiency when we have candida, because biotin is essential with molybdenum in actual fact to stop the replication of yeasts. Glutathione, glutathione, I went over too far, glutathione here, and then amino acids, and you often see that low, and this phosphoric acid is really more of a marker of vitamin D deficiency. Methylation panels, you can see SAM, SAW, and the SAM-SAW ratio, and now, as I said, we can see adenosine, which will be good. And so you've got your 5-methyl, your tetrahydrofolate, and folinic. This would be the typical profile that I would see in someone with fertility issues who has MTHFS polymorphisms and MTHFR. Very high folinic, very low methyl, and tetrahydrofolate may or may not be low, but here's the thing is folinic. So in that instance, I certainly wouldn't use folinic. And I forgot, I'm supposed to be over here too, aren't I? Yep. Okay. So let's go through a case. So 38-year-old female, key issues, fatigue, said she's had it for as long as she can remember. Food intolerance, some immediate, some delayed. Brain fog, concentration and clarity is a problem. She just can't handle stress at all. Currently experiencing severe agitation, palpitation and tremors, and she said her health was always very much a roller coaster. Fatigue had been going on for years. She was put on a methylated product by a practitioner, and she felt great for a week or two, but then she started having almost like seizures, and she said it was like I had locked jaw. I just could not move my jaw to talk properly. And that is actually a very good clinical sign for methyls being underutilized, too high. They're just not clearing them. She had tremors, tingling all over her body, couldn't speak, words stunted, simple cognitive functions were difficult. It's like my mouth can't keep up with my brain. My jaw feels wired. She generally felt very wired but tired. She was on Lovan, and she had lots of PMT, moodiness, crushing sleepiness for up to a week. Cycle was regular, had only one period since being on the product. Blood sugar issues, has had fibroids in the past, and anxiety was literally 10 out of 10. So just by looking at that, fatigue, so I would be thinking there, okay, well there's something probably not working too well in her CBS pathway. Food intolerance, straight away I'd be thinking, okay, well is there a histamine problem? Brain fog, concentration, is there an ammonia problem? Do we perhaps have a reduction in phosphatidylcholine? Inability to handle stress, well that's a problem. I mean that could be literally anything. And the agitation was not good. Anxiety was 10 out of 10. So she said before she took the methyl product, her biggest issue was that she just couldn't handle stress. She couldn't handle stress at all. Anything would set her off. Her mother and grandmother both have rheumatoid arthritis. Dad had anxiety, hypertension, and prostate cancer. Grandfathers both had cancer. Brother has asthma, respiratory issues. Her sleep, funnily enough, was pretty good, even though she was very anxious. And the gut was very much affected by the foods she was eating. So when she ate, she was getting palpitations, cough, gravelly throat, sinus, postnasal drip, flushing, sweating, definitely worse, dried fruit and wine. So what are you thinking there? Histamines and potentially sulfur. And she had the urinary urgency. It was low, secretory IgA very high. Her homocysteine was acceptable-ish. Folate 42.7 is probably on the higher end. Her B12 was 598, but don't forget she was on a product high B12, high folate, high B6, and trimethylglycine. Her mean corpuscular volume was 87, so that was actually pretty good. So is a red cell distribution width and a white cell count, and red cell count were actually good. And then we looked at her estrogen because I saw that the family history was there, and she had big issues with her 2 and 16, and given her family history, I wasn't particularly happy with that 4-hydroxy being high. Now, I think it's important that when we're looking at alleles, we make sure we understand that there are different ways of writing it. Remember earlier this morning I said some people report with the DNA base change, some people report with the amino acid change. So she had a genetic report, and the 1298CC, this one here, is homozygous for the A1298C. But when she'd taken the report to the other practitioner, she looked at the green and said, okay, there's no problems with MTHFR. But in actual fact, she was homozygous A1298C, and remember we said this morning there's a lot of susceptibility to depression in that cohort. And so we've got to be careful that we make sure we're looking at the relevant alleles and understanding which of them can confer susceptibility. So when I looked at her profile, I thought, okay, MTHFR A1298C, that's roughly a 40 to 50% downregulation of methylfolate. Methionine synthase, she's homozygous. So remember, that's the key gene with the help of B12 that picks up the folate into the methionine cycle. She was also homozygous MTRR. So her ability to get her B12 recycling and working to pick up that folate was going to be affected. MTHFD1, she was also homozygous. That is the trienzyme that is really important in converting your folates down to methylfolate. Nitric oxide synthase, she was heterozygous. And MN-SOD, manganese SOD, she was homozygous. CYP1B1, remember these two work at clearing toxic estrogens. These are the people that are also more likely to be your cranky patients. And she was cranky. And then we've got some glutathione, SNPs. So I thought, okay, we've potentially got a problem with sulfur, because when I questioned her about a sulfur, she really had problems and she didn't eat a lot of sulfur foods because of that. I put her on a low histamine diet. At the time, I did refer her for pyrols and the estrogen metabolism, which you saw, and I took away the methyl product because she's got a block where? Methionine synthase. So you put methyl products in there and she's going to be in a world of hurt, which is why she ended up with those excessive symptoms, because she wasn't utilising that huge dose, 1.2 milligrams of methylfolate. And I gave her phospholipid support to reduce cortisol. So phosphatidylserine reduces cortisol. It is a really good first step to do when someone is having problems with anxiety and this cortisol response, where when you take it in the morning, it will reduce cortisol response. For those people that can't get to bed, it will reduce cortisol enough that they can get to sleep. Phosphatidylserine, that phospholipid support. Electrolytes, so that the electrolytes will actually help her initially use those methyls that she's got in the system. And I gave her some niacin, because niacin metabolizes folate in its production. So that's why it works to reduce levels very quickly. So she came back. So appointment 1 was in October, and 2 weeks later she came back, and all of a sudden her energy had gone from really low to 5 to 6 out of 10. The niacin instantly helped with the tremors. She actually didn't really have any, the tremors had gone. She was feeling much calmer, and the seizure feeling that she was getting all the time had completely gone. Tingling gone. I didn't tell her to stop the Lovan. In fact, I said the opposite. I said, stay on it. But she said, I was feeling so much better, I went off it, which I don't like them doing. But she just decided that she didn't take it. And mood had improved significantly. Notice I took methyls out. I didn't put them in. I took them out. She hadn't done the blood tests at that time, or the estrogen metabolism. So I added in some zinc because her zinc was low. I also gave her a little bit of SAMe because I thought in the meantime, SAMe slows down MTHFR. Right? SAMe inhibits MTHFR activity. So if you're trying to slow methyls in the first place, giving SAMe can really help do that. P5P, I gave a 1. And B12 support, we put that in as well. Appointment 3, which was in about 6 weeks later, her energy was 8 out of 10, her anxiety was 2 out of 10. The diet was working so well that she actually had no reactions to food at all, and she'd had that for 10 years or so. Her breathlessness had gone because we'd sucked up that sulfur. Her PMS symptoms were getting better, and the gut had been better on the niacin, and all the other, no cramping, diarrhea had settled. Her ferritin was pretty bad. Her estrogen, I still don't think at this point I'd had it, and now that the bowels had settled, I added in a little bit of magnesium. And we decided to, at this point, support estrogen metabolism. So I still haven't given her any methyls or any folate. And then she rang me to say, you know what, I'm feeling so good, I don't want to see you again until May. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. So what we then did come May is we looked at liver, glutathione, improved that sulfur sensitivity, and we had another look at the gut. She's now completely symptom-free, no anxiety at all, ever, and no low mood. She's still not on methyls. She's fine on just the B12 and the cofactors and supporting the other parts of the pathway because she's COMT++. Her problem isn't necessarily making the methyls, it's utilizing them. So you don't always have to give methylfolate. And a lot of the time, I don't. Second case, 33-year-old female, previous miscarriage, lost a baby at 12 weeks, but was only 6 to 7 week size at the time, and she wanted to try again fairly soon. Her energy was only 2 out of 10, to the point where she really had to lie down after lunch every day. Her gut had been terrible ever since she was a teenager. She said very noisy, moves around a lot, worse with yeast, grains and seeds, lots of wind, gets shaky if she doesn't eat, and diarrhea and constipation pretty much all the time. Brain terrible, she can't concentrate, no memory, and she's had a big history of EBV. Her mum, dad and siblings all had IBS. Both grandmothers had breast cancer, dementia in the family. So what am I thinking with that family history? So the viral load is really important, and you will get a lot of patients with methylation disturbed that have immune issues. And it was interesting when I was working with a post-Lyme patient. I don't treat Lyme patients, but I do often see them post their treatment. And I logged on to the support group and I asked them how many of them had MTHFR polymorphisms. And they did a survey within the group, and 95% of them had some sort of MTHFR polymorphism, which got me thinking, is their immune system compromised, so their ability to fight the viruses is compromised? Because a lot of my MTHFR patients have a terrible history of viruses. They might have virus after virus after virus after virus, and when you test for them, they could have 6 or 7 that you know that they've had in the past. And have they ever really dealt with it? Probably not. And so that for me is a really good indication that I need to look at that viral load first. Grandmothers had breast cancer, so there's a susceptibility there perhaps, and we would want to see what her CYPs and COMT were. And dementia in the family, so I'm going to make sure that phosphatidylcholine is really good. I want to support BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. I want to make sure that she's exercising to support that. So there's a lot of things that we can do to stop the progression, particularly if we know that it's in the family. Her sleep was pretty good. She was gluten-free, but not religious about it at all. Headaches, she gets constant headaches, migraines twice a year. Constant light sensitivity, allergies, recurrent UTIs. Now, it is important when someone says recurrent UTIs that you just don't accept that as gospel. Because the first question you need to ask is, did you go to the doctor and did you actually have your urine tested, and was it an infection? And 9 times out of 10 they'll go, no, but I knew I had a UTI. Well, no, you actually didn't, because it could have been histamine, and it most definitely could have been oxalates upsetting that bladder. It makes it feel like it is. A histamine, it's itchy, it's irritable, it burns, it stings, it has the same feeling, but it may not be a UTI. So you would be thinking there that perhaps this wasn't it at all, it was probably histamine and or oxalates. But she's very moody, she's got PMS, her mood drops, sore breasts, lots of pain, recently had thrush, low libido, cystic breasts. So she's definitely got estrogen metabolism issues going on, and probably that estrogen is affecting histamine levels. That's what I would be thinking at this point. Palpitations and low blood pressure. So again, I know straight away my form of B12 that I'm going to give her, aren't I? Don't I? I'm going to give her hydroxy. Pins and needles, even if she holds them to a side like that, she gets pins and needles. So maybe it's nerves, maybe it's peripheral neuropathy. It might be a lack of phosphatidylcholine, but it's most likely going to be B12. Lots of anxiety, mood okay, but very low coming into the period. So it's pretty cyclic, and when you see those big drops, it's more than likely to be estrogen dominance affecting, because don't forget, histamine is a neurotransmitter. Okay, bloods, ferritin 27, low, white cell count, when I originally saw her, was 1.6, very low. Cholesterol 3.9. Now that's a problem because it's low end. Often cholesterol being low can be a manganese deficiency, but cholesterol is the starting ingredient for all your hormones. So you have low cholesterol, you're going to have low hormones. And you need cholesterol to be at a decent level. And fat metabolism issues, obviously, we need to look at. And triglycerides. So she's 677T homozygous, so she's got 25% of her folate potentially coming through the system. Now BHMT, so BHMT 02 and 08 are the two SNPs that I look at, and FUT2 when I'm thinking that someone has a long-term gut problem. I can't find any research about BHMT 0208, but remember that BHMT is the enzyme that takes homocysteine and regenerates it back to methionine. You usually, when I see that SNP, I will give my patients betaine hydrochloride, good old HCl, because they improve significantly. They're usually the patients that have long-term chronic gut issues. That's me to a T. BHMT 0208 homozygous, and if I have my betaine hydrochloride, my gut is so much better. So I put my patients with that polymorphism on betaine hydrochloride because most of them have problems with digesting. They just don't have enough hydrochloric acid to break food down, to even utilize their supplements. CBS, so this is the one that I was saying to you this morning. Don't think that you'll see lots of reports that it's an upregulation or a downregulation. There's actually no research to suggest it's either. But your line of questioning needs to be sulfur, taurine, glutathione, zinc, B6, iron, adenosine cobalamin energy cycle. That's where you're going to do your questioning when you see that ammonia, nitric oxide, and particularly when you see this in conjunction with NOS, nitric oxide synthase. This is where you're going to have those people that will have the problem with ammonia. Folate receptor 2, remember that's the receptor that takes the folate and brings it into the cell, into the folate cycle. So potentially that's a problem. PEMT, homozygous. Remember, this is the enzyme that converts phosphatidylethanolamine to phosphatidylcholine. SHMT, again, that's that enzyme that uses serine. NDUF, part of our electron transport pathway. Nitric oxide synthase, again, works with CBS. COMT, she's plus minus, so not good, not bad, but we'll just see how we go. And GAMT is for creatine and vitamin D receptor. So this was the test at the time, and you can see she was homozygous for this particular polymorphism. This is one of the key polymorphisms alongside with this. So that is relevant. And you can see, what did I want to point out there? That's her clotting factors, prothrombin, factor 5 Leiden, she's heterozygous. And here's her BHMT. So 08, 02, these are the ones that I really consider for gut. CBS, here's your most relevant, C699. I'm sorry, I'm not here. So this is the most relevant, C699T. and that's the one where you're going to ask your questioning. Here's your COMT. So we have two key COMT. This one here, the H62H, and COMT V, that should actually say beside it V158M. There's the RSID. So these two usually work in unison. So when you see that one is homozygous, the other one is most definitely going to be homozygous. Oh, there it is there. It's at the top, V158. Okay. Folate receptor 2, you can see that there, and then FUT2. And we'll talk about non-secretors later on. But MTHFD1, so very relevant in how we're transporting our folate down the folate pathway, but it's also very important for phosphatidylcholine. She's got no MTHFR A1298C, but her 677T is homozygous. And MTHFS, you can see homozygous as well. All right, so she has a problem with folate receptor 2 here. She has a problem with MTHFD1. She has a problem with MTR, and she has a problem with methylfolate, so, and MTHFS. So we can safely say she has a big problem with her folate pathway. We need to really help her here because she's not metabolizing and even making methyl, but even more importantly, she can't use it. So you definitely wouldn't want to give her methylfolate to start off the day, would you? Because she's not going to use it. So I wanted to assess her clotting factors, which I did. I referred her to a doctor to get that done. We looked at estrogen metabolism, folate, and we got some more bloods. So the first thing I actually gave her was some Candida support because she was constantly getting thrush. And so I will give molybdenum and biotin when I know I want to kill a yeast that's been around for some time because it actually stops the replication of those. I don't tend to give Candida diets anymore. I just say I really don't want you to have any sugar or anything that converts too quickly, but don't be too strict about it because I know that the molybdenum and biotin will pretty well fix the problem. Probiotic at night, phospholipid, I gave her a high dose of phosphatidylserine to just calm down the anxiety. I actually gave her a folinic base at the time. I gave her a folinic based because I wanted to support, but I was too nervous at that point to give her any methylfolate. Methyl B12 drops and continue on the gluten and dairy free. And you can see that her estrogen metabolism was not particularly good. Homocysteine was elevated, so it was 12.2. Her cardiolipin, not good as well. And so I knew that I would have to get rid of that homocysteine, but I wasn't going to necessarily give her a lot of methyls. And you can see her white cell count was quite low. AMH, that's another story, but you can actually, there are research studies to show that patients with MTHFR tend to have a higher AMH, so don't worry, like I don't look at AMH anymore as far as the fertility goes. Cholesterol, you can see, was on the low end. So the specialist didn't really want to do anything about the antiphospholipid, but I did. Estrogen metabolism, not good. Cholesterol. So I did end up giving her methyl B6, methylfolate, trimethylglycine. I really wanted to get that homocysteine down. She can't go into pregnancy with an elevated homocysteine and MTHFR because there are too many potential complications when those two things are combined. Indole 3's dim sulforaphane increased the B12. I gave her a multi-mineral with zinc, a little bit of molybdenum, vanadium, B6, herbal formula, and continue with the phospholipids and an NADH support. Her energy had come up pretty quickly. Digestion wasn't as good, but she really wasn't following the diet particularly well. She was actually really stubborn with the diet. Mood was much better, less stress, felt much happier. She was actually doing more exercise, which was really going to help her, and her sleep was good. She's stressed. I stressed to her how important the diet was, and so I said to her, you really have to do this, and I'm also going to put a low histamine diet on top of what you've already got, which she didn't like very much. I increased the methylfolate a little bit more. I introduced some other supplements, CoQ10, antioxidants, the calcium, magnesium, and then her blood glucose was actually quite good. Her ferritin, you can see, came up quite a bit, and her homocysteine dropped pretty quickly. So the lower homocysteine supplements you do not use for a long period of time, because it will reduce homocysteine within weeks. The maximum amount of time that you need to get it down really is about 6 weeks. So you don't keep them on that homocysteine lowering supplement for too long, because you're going to bottom out homocysteine, and then you're going to have to work really hard to get it back up. By March, she said energy was 7 out of 10, no diarrhea. The low histamine diet really helped. No migraines. Her mood was great. Anxiety nil. She felt really good. And now she was going to start actively trying for pregnancy. So I gave her some nattokinase. I actually gave her an autoimmune formula because she had ENA levels. I dropped all her sulforaphane and DIM because we don't want to be detoxifying going into pregnancy. And I also dropped her multi-mineral and her NAC at that time as well. She fell pregnant pretty quickly. So March 15 to May 15, she was pregnant. And she was now on a combination of folinic and folate, plus I added an additional 800 micrograms of methylfolate. So she was actually on 1.6 milligrams of methylfolate. Her gut was awesome, best it had ever been in her whole life. December 15, she actually gave birth to a little girl, but she still had a tongue tie. My lesson from that case was that I now go much higher with my methylfolate in this patient, and I do not use folinic. That's my lesson, and I have not had one tongue tie since. And interestingly, I was talking to someone who is a doctor in Northern Territory, and she said she recently had a conversation with the midwives in the hospitals up there to say they are seeing a huge percentage of kids with tongue ties. And I just wonder whether it is, a combination of the wrong form of folate that we're actually using and the dose. So that was my good lesson out of that. It wasn't a bad tongue tie at all. She didn't have to have any operation or anything to improve it, but I could have gone a lot higher. And she's since had a second child, no tongue tie, and I went much higher with the levels. Oh, I think we've run out of time. All right, so we might actually, do we have questions? Yeah? That was my point before. So when you address the diet and the oxalates, your ferritin and iron will improve even though you don't give any iron, because you're not binding iron. All right, so we may actually come back to this if we have time. I'm happy to go, but I'm aware that you kick off at 1 o'clock and you probably want a bit of a mind break. So what's the consensus? Do you want me to go through this last case, or would you rather have a break? Last case? All right, I'll go fairly quickly. 48-year-old female, mental health, crippling anxiety, absolute fear and worry all the time. Depression made worse by antidepressants. very low self-esteem, gut issues, bad digestion, recurrent candida, adrenal issues, blood sugar issues, has to eat all the time, or she just feels mentally she can't cope. Sleep terrible. She sleeps between 11:30 and midnight, and then tosses and turns all night, and then wakes up to get the kids off to school. So she's an absolute wreck. High stress. She's currently so depressed, she can't be bothered to do anything. What has that told you straight away? Yes. See how good this is? So she cries most of the way through the first appointment. For an hour and a half, she bawled her eyes out the whole time. She said she would never hurt herself because she has kids to look after, but she's thought about it. Her dad had Parkinson's disease. Dopamine. Brother spina bifida. Folate, exactly. Breast cancer in the family? Yes. She has a history of vulvodynia. So connected with oxalates, it's not funny. You improve oxalates, you will improve or get rid of vulvodynia. She's had a lot of antibiotics for chest infections and UTIs. We wonder whether or not they were UTIs now. Recurrent candida, oxalates again. Diet not great. She's eating gluten and dairy, not enough protein, little meat. Her afternoon snack and pick-me-up are biscuits and snacks, and she's having about 12 cups of tea a day. She likes anything sweet, makes her feel good. And as I said, and drugs in the past, marijuana, and she loved it. Right, so it gives you a big clue, doesn't it, where we're going with this straight away. Period at 15, irregular cycle, terrible mood changes pre-period, recurrent thrush, had to have IVF to conceive, 1 miscarriage, 1 ectopic pregnancy. Skin, dry and scaly, anxiety, gets shaky hands, legs, feels overwhelmed all the time, still smoking 10 cigarettes a day. But remember, comp minus, they're very addictive personalities. These are the people it's incredibly hard to get them stop smoking because it makes them feel better. Bloods. Iron probably too high. Zinc and copper not in balance. The pyrols, when I first saw a 50.9. Blood histamine 0.8, still a bit high. Homocysteine too high, 11.8. Folate okay. Active B12 too low. We want that over 100. T4, T3, TSH, okay-ish. Cortisol, low, and stool tests, she had low E. coli, high strep, high yeast, high bifido. So we know now high yeast and the strep is going to cause problems with methionine synthase. Her methylation panel, look at that, no SAM, really, to even consider. And low SOR. So she's really bottomed out. And look at her methylfolate. And here's the pattern again, folinic. So we don't always assume that folinic is the way to go because she's got plenty of it. She's probably not converting it. So we can definitely help conversion. There's that CYP. Well, the main CYP SNP, these two here, she's heterozygous. I think that's the only thing I wanted to point out on that page. Heterozygous, these two here. Okay. Here we have a FUT2. We've got folate receptor heterozygous, and we've got FUT2. So we'll talk about FUT2, but essentially FUT2 affects B12, but it also puts them in the category of being a non-secretor, which means digestively, they don't basically adhere their bacteria to the gut wall. So what they need is not necessarily probiotics, they need prebiotics like guar gum. MTHFS, you can see that she's homozygous, and we saw that high folinic. And we can see here MTHFR, C677T, she's homozygous, and MTHFS, she's homozygous. And MTRR, she's heterozygous here. That's the main SNP we look at. And here's the main SNP we look at for MTR, but she's fine with that. COMT, so she's actually heterozygous for COMT. So putting all that together, I'm okay with giving her some methyls. I'm fine with that. It's actually probably the best. And you can't really see what that says, but it's basically saying MAO. And even though you've got to look at the A allele, so the 6-3, this one here, the T allele is slow. So she's also got a problem with MAO. We're going to go through that a lot on the weekend. GAD. So GAD is the enzyme that takes glutamate and converts it to GABA. So when you're seeing a profile like that, and it's B6 dependent, there's a lot of heterozygous SNPs in there, and so we might be thinking that some L-theanine could help, B6 could help, because it will help with that conversion to GABA. So what did I give her? I gave her a liposomal spray of the B12. There you go. I did use the B12. I gave her trimethylglycine to help that homocysteine regenerate and get recycled. I did put her on some B6 and zinc, and I gave her a nitric oxide support. I know, but they agreed to keep going. And I gave her, there's the N-acetyltyrosine. I gave her 1 cap 3 times a day, 500 milligrams 3 times a day with some resveratrol, because it will really help dampen down that brain inflammation. I gave her some magnesium glycinate, because again, the glycine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter or help with the anxiety. And I gave her the phosphatidylserine because she was very anxious. So in the 2 weeks later, she was generally less anxious, and her mood had only slightly improved. Her bowels are still loose. She's still got the wind and this growing grumbling noise. And so I put her on the gluten-free and dairy-free diet and said, you really need to stick to this. By a month later, her panicky feeling had completely gone. She was less depressed, more optimistic. Sleep was much better. She was actually sleeping through the night. She wasn't waking every half hour. So when you have that sleep latency, that's where you're thinking B12. Because B12 helps set that circadian rhythm to ensure that you stay asleep. Motivation, good. Gut's still an issue, but she's still having that bloody milk in her 12 cups of tea a day. Right? She just wouldn't let go of it. Methyl, so we continued on. I didn't really change anything, but what I did do is I actually added some more folate here, 1/4 of a tab, which is 100 micrograms, in addition to what else she was taking, and said, let's just go slowly. But by the next appointment, she was feeling really good. She was motivated. She was happy. She didn't have any anxiety. Her stools were still not good, but she's still having that goddamn milk. It was like it was her last bastion of defiance. I needed my milk. And then by now she'd had a whole methylfolate, but she didn't feel as good on it, so we went back to the 1/4. So it actually doesn't matter what level you give them, you just need to make them feel better. And then by November, she said, you've actually changed my life. I'm really not sure what you've done, but it's the only time in 48 years that I can honestly say, I feel good. I feel like this is what I was always meant to feel like. Isn't that awesome? That's great. She said, thank you for rescuing me. And so we went on to do a lot more stuff with her, but her mood has always been good. And you notice that we didn't do anything particularly tricky. And we gave her as much folate as she can cope with. So what I ended up saying to her is, when you know you're going into a stressful situation and you're going to use your methyls, you might want to up that methylfolate a bit. And she does it now. She's actually regularly takes one, but she's got the feeling now that she knows how she's supposed to feel. So when she dips, she takes a bit more methyl and she comes back up again. When she's overdone it, she knows she's overdone it, so she doesn't take it for 3 or 4 days. So what your patients, once you get them to where you want them to be, they'll know, and I'll call it their sweet spot. Someone's sweet spot might be 100 micrograms, but someone's maybe 8 milligrams. But the only way you're going to get there is by going slowly and addressing things as you go. So some people, I might take 4 months before I even think about putting any folate at all. Some people I've seen for 2.5 years and I still don't give them folate. Others, when it's more urgent to improve mood, I might get in there much quicker. So every patient has a sweet spot, and that's what I tell them. You have a sweet spot, you overdo it, you're going to feel it. You need to take your niacin to undo it and get yourself back to norm. But if you're going into high energy like athletes, and you might need to superload your methylfolate to cope with that anxiety, that extra stress that you're putting on your body at the time. So, the presenting symptoms are really important. Think about them, think about the pathways that you need to be working on. You've already come leaps and bounds since 8 o'clock this morning. And over the weekend, you're going to get much more. So consider methyl donors. We've got a good case on the weekend where methyl donors were a problem. So if you've got patients with high anxiety coming in and they're taking buckets of quercetin, think, hang on, are they probably not coping with methyls right now? Do I need to take that out and work on a few things before I consider putting it back in? They're all methyl donors. All of those things. So we need to be aware of it and assess our initial patients for, could this be a problem with them not utilizing methyls? There's also a lot of drugs that are going to deplete nutrients within the cycle. Antacids at the top of my list because you're affecting B12. And how many patients are on proton pump inhibitors for years and years and years, not weeks. Weeks I have no problem with, but years and years and years, that's a problem. Family history really does give us a big clue. There's your susceptibility, and we need to be thinking about that and what pathways we need to support. B12 we're going to talk about a lot on the weekend, so I'm not going to spend much time on that. But think about the downstream. So the strategy should be B12, cofactors, and what's going on with CBS. CBS is your downstream. If there's no issues there, you can go on to address some of the other pathways. But if there are issues there, you've got to address it first. Homocysteine does give us a clue. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it does give us a clue. Drugs that raise, I've got a whole webinar on drugs that affect methylation. So if you want to know more about that, you can listen to that. Thyroid function, estrogen metabolism, we need to think about all this. Blood pressure, we've talked about some of the clues there. And methylfolate is often the very, very last thing that you do. So don't be in a hurry to put the methylfolate in there. Think about what else is going on before you go to the methylfolate. And you must tell your patients that there is a chance they may react negatively. You do need to give them some niacin if you hand out methyls to say, you're going to ring me and you're going to tell me you've got a problem, and I'm going to say, remember that little packet of niacin I gave you? This is it. You put that somewhere safe because you may need that. And I've had people suicidal ring the clinic and say, I don't think I can get through the day. Because someone has said to them, you have MTHFR, take 5 milligrams of methylfolate. It's not the strategy. It's not what we need to be doing. We don't see a gene and say, you have to have X. That's rubbish. It's your environment. It's your susceptibility. It's what's going on that we need to be aware of. And there are some of the signs and symptoms of people just not utilising methyls. And obviously we take niacin. Alrighty, so here's some of the genes that I see connections with, and we will certainly go through that more, but they're the sort of things that you could be thinking about with you know, these connections. Alright, and obviously environment is key. So we had a whole summit last year on the environment and how it affects methylation. And that will be available for you soon. So if you, and it is great, we had some amazing speakers because, as I said, irrespective of any SNP, the environment affects methylation. Just having a yeast infection will inhibit methionine synthase, which is going to affect the way you cope with and utilise methylfolate. All right. And what do we get with this? Well, you can hopefully see that we can improve our patients better than we ever could before because we're being very individualised and we're being very targeted. All right, so we have half an hour before we kick off again. Thank you, you've been so patient, you've been so good. I know it's a lot of information, but there's a lot more. So by joining our practitioner membership support group, you can learn a lot more about this, but that's the basics.